Passing. By Tony Angelo. The lights of the stage were a confession, their heat. Julia Serrano was at the podium, alone in a cobalt blue dress, and could feel the sweat gather at the edges of her wig. Incumbent Mayor Caldwell, a man whose face appeared to have been chiseled into a permanent smirk of condescension, was hitting his marks opposite her. "Let's get real," Caldwell boomed, his voice echoing through the auditorium. "This is an issue of experience, not narrative. San Francisco needs a steady hand, not a hashtag." The crowd, a carefully cut pie of loyalties, answered with a smattering of applause. Julia's supporters fired back with a wave of boos. Inside, Julian, the man who was Julia, felt a familiar, icy calm fall over him. This was it. The tipping point. The part of the show where vulnerability was a sword. He let his shoulders slump, just slightly. He dropped his eyes to his notes, as if the words had wounded him. He touched the graceful line of his jaw, a habit he'd acquired, one that drew attention to the subtle, clever work of the makeup artist who contoured away the man beneath. "The mayor is right," Julia's voice began, softer than it had been, the voice being picked up by the microphone with a raw, vulnerable intimacy. The hall went quiet. "This isn't a viral story." She lifted her head, her eyes finding the camera, a direct, searing plea to the thousands of citizens watching at home. "This is my life. It's the lives of all the people in this city who have ever felt invisible. Who have ever been told that their existence is inconvenient." The word hung in the air, truth. Julian almost laughed. His entire campaign, his entire public existence, was the most complicated, high-stakes lie in San Francisco politics. He was Julian Pierce, a political consultant who had watched his moderate, policy-driven candidates get devoured by opponents who wielded identity as a sword and a shield. He saw the game and decided to play it better than everyone else. He studied, plotted, created Julia. He created a past, a transition timeline, a narrative so wrenchingly, exquisitely real it was bulletproof. Vulnerability was the new currency of the realm, and he was minting it. "For years, I lived a life that wasn't my own," Julia continued, a genuine tremble entering her voice, drawn up from the exhaustion of the deception. "I donned a mask each day, hoping no one would see the person behind. Doesn't that require a steady hand, Mr. Mayor? Doesn't that require experience?" This time the applause was deafening. It was a roar. Caldwell was left spluttering, trapped. How could he now attack her? He'd looked like a monster. Julian had won the debate. But as he smiled, a perfect, practiced smile, he felt a cold dread. The performance was getting too good. He was beginning to forget where the mask stopped and he started. Maya Lin watched the exchange from the press pool with a reporter's detached fascination. She wrote in her notebook, "Turns vulnerability into strength." Flawless pivot. On paper, Julia Serrano was a dream candidate. A wonky policy wonk, her proposals on housing and transportation were revolutionary, wrapped in the kind of personal story that made cable television producers weep tears of joy. Her numbers were through the roof, particularly among the youth vote that Maya was a member of. And yet, something didn't feel right. It wasn't a single thing, but a cascade of small dissonances. The style of Serrano's speeches, for all their passion, appearing reverse-engineered from a political science textbook. The too perfect, almost literary, cadence of her off-the-cuff remarks. The fact that her background as Julian Serrano before transitioning was an entire blank slate, a handful of unremarkable corporate jobs, a degree from an online university, no messy relationships, no embarrassing college photos. He was a ghost. Maya had been a journalist long enough to know that no one's life was that squeaky clean. She'd started out on city council meetings and clawed her way up to top political correspondent for the San Francisco Chronicle by paying attention to her instincts. And her instincts were telling her that Julia Serrano was a fabrication. Her editor, a jaded veteran named Sal, had brushed her off. So she's polished. So what? She's a politician. Don't look for a conspiracy where there's only good PR, Lynn. But Maya couldn't let it go. She started digging, not into Julia, but into the man she used to be. She spent weeks searching for the ghost of Julian Serrano. His former colleagues at a tech firm described him as quiet, capable, and unnoticeable. Honestly, one of them told her over coffee, I don't even recall his face that clearly. He was just there. That had not been a description of a person. That had been a description of a cover. The lead came from an old, inactive social media profile from a website that had shut down years ago. It was a profile for a Julian Pierce, not Serrano, but the face in the fuzzy profile picture was the same face she'd caught in the single, campaign-approved before photo. This Julian was not a ghost. He had friends. He had status updates. He had photos of his days on the Stanford debate team, a real university. He was a political operative, a backroom kingmaker who was famous for his ruthless, Machiavellian ways. Maya received a shock, the kind that only comes when you realize you're onto something huge. Julian Pierce had vanished 2 years earlier. 1 year later, Julia Serrano emerged. He hadn't simply transitioned. He'd built an entire fake persona to bury his past as a political predator. This was not a transgender rights narrative. This was a narrative of the boldest political hoax in American history. The pressure was getting to Julian. He sat in his Spartan apartment, the Julia wig on a mannequin head in the corner of the room, its fake hair shining in the evening sunlight. His campaign manager and the other person who was in on the secret, David Chen, paced in front of him. "The polls are incredible," David said, his voice buzzing with nervous energy. "We're 3 points up. 3. Caldwell's team is in full panic mode. They're going to start throwing mud." "Let them," Julian muttered, rubbing his temples. He was wearing a gray sweatshirt and jeans, his own short cropped hair a stark contrast to Julia's flowing locks. "What are they going to find? A man who doesn't exist?" "That's not what I am worried about." "I am worried about you," David said, breaking off to look at him. "You're slipping. Yesterday at the town hall, you almost used the wrong pronoun to refer to your father." "It was a long day." "It's more than that, Julian. This Julia business. It's consuming you. You flinch now when I use your real name." "The lie is the point, David," Julian shot back, his voice bare. "To show the whole rotten system. To illustrate that these people, these voters, aren't invested in policy. They're invested in a narrative. A narrative of tragedy? They want to vote for a symbol, not a person. I'm just giving them the best symbol I could come up with." "And if you win?" David whispered. "What then? You reign as Julia for 4 years? You fake hormone treatments? You fake a life? Where do you draw the line?" Julian had no reply. He stared at the mannequin head. In the middle of the night, sometimes, he'd talk to it, rehearsing Julia's lines, her voice, her imagined anguish. He was a stranger to himself. The vulnerability he performed on stage was starting to feel real, a deep, aching hollowness that had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with the man he was becoming, a fake, a puppet master, and a ghost. His phone buzzed. An email from Maya Lin at the Chronicle. Subject: Request for exclusive interview, Julia Serrano. The message was polite, professional, but Julian felt a chill run down his spine. He read the final line. "I'd particularly like to discuss your life before your transition, and your time as Julian Pierce." Pierce. She knew his real name. The game was over. The interview was set up for the following afternoon at Julia's campaign headquarters. Julian spent the night sleepless, considering possibilities. Deny everything. Discredit Maya. Flee the country. Finally, he came to understand that there was only one way out. He needed to control the explosion. He stepped into the conference room as Julia, who was resplendent in a cream-colored pantsuit and radiating a calm confidence he didn't possess. Maya Lin was already there, a slight woman in her mid-20s with eyes that seemed to see too much. She sat alone, no camera crew. Just a digital recorder on the table between them. They started with the usual questions about the polls, her platform, her vision for the city. Julia aced them. Julian felt this strange, out-of-body experience, as if he were hearing a stranger talk. Then Maya leaned in a little. "I want to talk about your past," she said, her voice even. "Not Julia's past. Or even the past of the fictional Julian Serrano. I want to talk about Julian Pierce." Julian took a slow, deliberate breath. This was it. He had a speech prepared, A confession that would paint him as a well-meaning political martyr, a man who went too far to prove a point. He would incinerate his own campaign, but he would do it on his own terms. Before you say anything, Maya continued, interrupting his planned confession, I want you to know that I understand. Julian's brows furrowed. Understand what? I understand why you had to do it. Why you had to create him. Him? Create him? The words didn't make any sense. Julian stared at her, his brain racing. Maya slid a photo across the table. It was aged, dog-eared, a photograph of a young girl with short-cut hair in an impossibly frilly dress, gazing into the camera with an expression of absolute, unmitigated despair. On the back, in faint pencil, was a name, Julie Pierce. My father was a state senator, Maya said softly. A very conservative one. I found this in his old files. From a fundraiser 20 years ago. You were there with your parents. Julian looked at the photo. He remembered that dress. The itching lace. The feeling of being suffocated. You disappeared after high school, Maya went on, her voice not blaming, but with a gentle comprehension. Everyone figured you'd skip town. Then, a few years later, this whiz-kid political strategist named Julian Pierce appears at Stanford. No past, no family. A total creation. The room began to spin. The double meaning of his life was not what he had imagined. The lie was deeper, older, more painful than the one he knew he was telling. You're not a man who impersonated a trans woman, she said to him, her eyes nailing his. You're a trans man who, to survive in the dog-eat-dog, male-dominated world of political consulting, impersonated a cis man. You created Julian Pierce. The air left his lungs. He had buried that truth so far he had almost convinced himself it wasn't real. He had transitioned in private, without help, and built the persona of Julian Pierce as his shield. A man. A cold, calculating, callous man. He was so good that he began to believe the performance himself. And then, Maya pieced it together, her voice barely above a whisper, you saw the armor was a cage. You saw the political landscape changing, saw this twisted cult of a certain type of identity, and you saw your chance. Not merely to triumph, but maybe to be home at last. She wasn't talking about the mayor's office. You decided to appear as a cis man impersonating a trans woman, she finished. One performance piled upon another. An entire life of double meanings. The only thing that wasn't true was the middle part. Julie, looked down at his hands. For the first time in years, he wasn't calculating. He wasn't performing. He was simply feeling the crushing weight of 2 decades of deceit, of hiding not from the world, but from himself. The vulnerability he had faked on stage was nothing compared to the naked, terrifying vulnerability that was overwhelming him now. He looked up at Maya. Her recorder was still on. She could destroy him or she could unlock a truth so complicated, so irretrievably human, that nobody would know what to do with it. The name I chose when I was 16, he said, his voice cracking, the tightly controlled alto of Julia giving way to his natural tenor. The real one was Julian. He had come full circle, a snake eating its own tail. He had created a lie to cover up a truth, then another lie to uncover the first, only to have everything collapse to reveal the truth he had forgotten was there the entire time. Maya reached out slowly and turned off the recorder. There was silence in the room. It was the sound of a story ending, and a life, perhaps, just beginning,